thank you all again so much for being here. I sent sort of a rough outline of an agenda, and we'll stick to that. We're going to do updates of what's happening, the current situation, then ways you can get involved. And we've also created, we're in the process of doing a more in-depth version, but we've created a toolkit that you can bring to faith communities or to your local congregations or just friends locally. So a little, yeah, a little bit of an update of where we are. I mean, it is honestly hard to keep up with what's happening at the federal level. As you know, through executive order, there has been a stopping of refugee resettlement, increased enforcement of immigration, including deportations, which a couple of folks mentioned. You've seen in Roanoke, we saw in Arlington as well. And while the rhetoric is still focused on folks with criminal records, not all of the detentions and deportations have been for people with criminal records. Now, additionally, there is some interesting news. There was, for example, an executive order to limit birthright citizenship because of a particular reading of the 14th Amendment. That has been put on hold. That is not going into effect, although the court case is still going to continue playing out. Also, there was a moment when they were using the U.S.'s facility in Guantanamo Bay in Cuba as detention for undocumented immigrants before deportation. That has also been shut down, so we are not using that at the moment. That said, immigration detention and deportation is up. As Michelle mentioned, there are two federal immigration detention facilities in Virginia, one in Farmville and one in Caroline County, and the capacity of both of those is higher than it has been in more than 5 years. So it's not just, oh, the pandemic meant we had fewer people in detention. No, this is even higher than the early 2020, late 2019 numbers. So that is concerning and happening and very, very real. Another part of the current circumstance that we are hearing from our members, from faith communities, is the fear that, again, a lot of you mentioned, folks, kids not coming to school, people not showing up at church, not showing up at food pantries because they are afraid. Part of that was in response to another executive order from the president around, there has been a practice and a memo called a sensitive location policy that said ICE was recommended not to carry out enforcement actions in churches, hospitals, and schools. For a decade and a half, that's been the case. The current president issued an executive order saying that is no longer the case. We are not protecting sensitive locations to a higher level. Now, again, it's an ever-moving policy field, but these are some of the realities that are happening. One final piece that's particularly important today is that the federal government is considering a budget resolution, which has impact on so many parts of our lives, so many parts of our neighbors' lives. But in terms of immigration, the House has passed a budget bill, and the Senate is considering it today, that would increase funding for Border Patrol and border and deportation enforcement and detention, and would decrease funding for refugee programs and for social service programs that benefit both native-born citizens, new citizens, people with legal immigration status, and immigrant neighbors. So I highly encourage you to call your folks in Congress, particularly your folks in the Senate. Everybody here is in Virginia, so it's Senator Kane and Warner are your two reps, and encourage them to vote against that budget resolution, that budget bill that they're considering today. That's the 3,000-foot view of what's happening right now. Again, everything is in motion. Technically, the the way our government works, as we all learned in middle school civics class, we have three branches: the executive, the judicial, and the legislative. And there are checks and balances between those three branches in theory. In practice, the last couple of months have been really interesting to watch because while the executive branch, which includes the president and ICE, is about enforcing the law, they are supposed to be enforcing the laws that have been passed by Congress, and they are supposed to defer to judicial authority on what is legal and what is not. And that has not always been an easy thing to, that has not always been as straightforwardly followed as we would like rules to be, to say it in the most diplomatic way I can. So for example, it was a judge did order that refugees who had already been accepted for resettlement would be resettled. Those planes have still not taken off. Those folks have still not been allowed into the country. So, oh, thank you, Terry. Both Virginia senators, Kane and Warner, have committed verbally to voting no on the budget continuing resolution. Thank you for putting that in the chat. That's very helpful. So we're in a strange time. The legislature can put pressure. Letters and calls to the executive are important, and still believing in the judicial system is important. And we want to make sure that as people of faith, we are standing up for our values, no matter what that looks like, even in the face of government potentially doing things that are not in accordance with our values. Okay, again, this has been a whirlwind, very brief explanation. Are there any questions on the current situation, particularly at the federal level? Oh, I didn't mention the current situation at the state level. I will come back to that. Are there any questions about the federal level right now? Oh, and Kristen has a good point in the chat. Affirmations of that commitment to vote no are still helpful. We love cheering folks on just as much as we love encouraging folks to stand up for our beliefs. So. Okay. Not seeing any hands up or urgent questions about what's happening at the federal level, I'll mention a couple of things at the state level. You all got an email from the ICPP's co-executive director, gosh, 2 weeks ago now, about Governor Youngkin's Virginia executive order around immigration. So Governor Youngkin said that every local police force in Virginia should enter into an agreement with ICE to cooperate with immigration enforcement. It's called a 287G agreement, but the numbers are not super important right now. There has been mixed reviews and mixed responses to this. On a moral level, these kinds of agreements for local police to collaborate with immigration enforcement tend to erode trust in local police, particularly in immigrant communities. Folks are less likely to report crime, less likely to, victims are less likely to get assistance because of that, again, increased fear. At the same time, it's not great from an economic perspective because forcing these local police forces and sheriff's offices to do the job of federal law enforcement without increased funding makes their jobs more strenuous and puts extra responsibilities on them. So different localities around Virginia have taken differing approaches. As far as I know, only 1 or 2 have actually signed the 287G official agreement with ICE. Several have said, we're not going to sign it unless there's actual teeth to this executive order. Right now, it's a directive, but it's not entirely clear what the enforcement of that directive would be. But the ICPP does have a letter that you can send an email to the governor asking him to reconsider this executive order, both from the moral, economic, and safety grounds. So that's happening at the state level. Again, on our local levels, we are seeing this fear play out. And I will mention, you know, last night, part of the reason I'm at a coffee shop right now instead of a Virginia Interfaith's office is because last night I was at an event in Virginia Beach that was part know your rights training for immigrants and part filling out power of attorney paperwork. So, for example, if a person is deported, having that power of attorney paperwork is important so that folks know who is going to take care of their children, who is responsible for their bank account. If they own a small business, who takes control of that small business? There's all sorts of things. And, you know, talking with a mother last night, and she asked, you know, if something were to happen to me, you know, could this person who would be my power of attorney, could she bring my 3-year-old daughter to see me in Honduras? And like these kind of heartbreaking questions are the reality for many of our neighbors. So from the macro to the microcosm, it just makes such, it's having real impact on people's lives and headspace. Okay, happy to answer questions, but I'm not seeing any, and there's lovely stuff happening in the chat. A rally to support refugees and immigrants in Arlington tomorrow. And this is all very exciting. Michelle.
Can I ask? Oh,
and
sorry.
Then,
I jumped
go ahead,
in.
Jenny,
Sorry.
and then Michelle.
I'm sorry, I didn't pay attention to the hand raise. Can you mention which localities were actually the ones that signed on to it? And then in terms of the training that you were doing, is that available in other locations as well? Or like, how is that offered?
Off the top of my head, I don't remember which localities. I will see if Bedford County, which is out in the Southwest, said they signed it. That's the only one that I have top of my email right now. That doesn't mean it's the only one, but it is the only one I'm finding at a quick search. The Know Your Rights training, the shortest answer is yes, it's happening a lot of places. We're very pleased. The slightly longer answer is that it's a bit complicated. Partly because, for example, the group we partnered with yesterday decided not to put out a Facebook event, not to advertise very broadly because the whole point is that folks who were undocumented could come and fill out paperwork. They didn't want that to be the subject of an enforcement activity. So it was kind of quietly spread through email and word of mouth. Now, there are a lot of organizations, great organizations, who are doing this kind of work. And I am going to mention some of them. But you sort of look locally at who might be serving the immigrant population. So, Jenny, where are you again?
I'm in Williamsburg.
Okay, so Williamsburg area. So not totally crazy. Bacolao, the Virginia Coalition of Latino Organizations, is the group that put on the training last night. Getting connected with them. Williamsburg House of Mercy might have a sense. There's some folks in kind of the Newport News area, kind of further east on the peninsula, who might know. Legal Aid Justice Center, Catholic Charities are some groups that provide these sorts of supports. Michelle, and then Andy.
Thank you. With Jenny, I was going to ask about if you knew about who had signed on this 287G agreement thing. And also, I'll just mention, although this is probably redundant, I don't need to say this, certainly the Virginia ICLU is a group who have printed Know Your Rights sheets in both English and Spanish, and probably other languages as well, that you can always get a hold of. What I was going to say is anecdotal, but it does bounce off of this 287G thing. I have no idea if my town, Farmville, or the county I'm in, Prince Edward County, has signed that, but I will share an anecdote with you that just maybe 10 days ago, we received an alert on our cell phones, which we get, if there's a tornado warning or something like that, that alerted us to, I think it was 3, it might have been 5, it was an odd number. But anyway, a handful of men having escaped detention from the Farmville ICE facility. And it was an alert that did say they're not considered to be dangerous, but please let us know if you know anything about it. So I'm just sharing that because even if my county has not signed on to this 287G thing, it does seem to suggest that we are in collaboration with ICE here in Farmville.
Yeah. Thank you. Andy, your hand came down. Did your question get answered?
It wasn't a question. I was going to mention to the Cornerstones, in collaboration with the local Reston and Herndon clergy community, we held a training in partnership with Just Neighbors for faith organizations, specifically about what they can do to help their communities prepare. It was a know your rights training. We didn't actually fill out paperwork. Also, Cornerstones runs community neighborhood organizations, kind of community organizing activities in the Herndon and Reston area. And that's been a discussion, but it's exactly like you said, Sheila. A lot of these things are done quietly as to not be a lightning rod, both for ICE raids, but more importantly, a political lightning rod. For us, we're right outside the nation's capital. We don't want to draw attention to things. And so even our elected officials have been reluctant to publicly reassure the community that their government and their police forces are not cooperating with ICE unless there is a judicial warrant. And they're reluctant to publicly state that. While they want to reassure the community, they don't want to, again, be a lightning rod for enforcement actions. And so I do know a lot of our elected officials are privately in small groups, non-public events, reassuring the community.
Thank you. And Maggie, I see your hand up as well.
Yeah, so my question is about the children, actually, that I was referring to earlier. What is going on with this children being in court? Do others know? Because I'm having trouble getting information even about it.
The short answer there is someone may know. Someone probably knows. But unfortunately, the longer version is there is so much in the air and so much happening at once that it's hard to keep track of. So how did you find out about these children in court without a lawyer?
So
through the like newspaper or through activist circles or?
it was, I guess you would say, an activist circle. It was a lawyer who was in court representing one child and was concerned because there were so many without representation.
That is very problematic and concerning.
I didn't
One
even,
of
Can I add something?
yeah.
these,
Sorry,
thank you.
yeah, this is Ramon here with the ICPP. Thank you, Sheila and Maggie, for that question. I recently joined, and I saw someone put on the chat, workshop with CAN, Congregation Action Network, and I remember the presenter, Julio, the director, was mentioning just how in this current scenario, like the immigration enforcement is done in such a fast way, an expedited way, that the narrative that they're putting out is like they're going after like the criminals, but there's a lot of collateral. They take they're taking folks that are not on that list or that weren't necessarily that they come across in the community, in their homes. And I also learned I would probably suggest like an organization like Legal Aid Justice Center to see if you can learn more about it, or CLU. But a lot of the folks that are getting detained are not even given a chance to access legal representation. The stuff is happening so fast. They're presented in front of a court without even getting the option to have representation. And I'm not a lawyer. I speak on that, but it just seems like a tactic to just get folks out in such an expedited way that they're not given a due process, like, you know, given a fair chance. So even someone that might be an asylum case or something, or someone based on an accusation could be deported without even given a chance to be represented by a lawyer. So it's really unfortunate. I haven't heard that, really concerning. But I would maybe check in with one of the legal aid organizations, perhaps. And thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. And the part of the reality is that in criminal court, US law guarantees a lawyer whether or not you have the ability to pay for a lawyer. That's where public defenders come from. In immigration court, it's a civil offense. So it's not a criminal offense, it's a civil offense, like suing someone, like divorce, like jaywalking. And so you are not guaranteed a lawyer unless you can pay for one or find one pro bono, and that is complicated. So there's some groups that offer pro bono representation, definitely worth getting involved with them and being aware. And go ahead, yes.
I was just going to mention, I think my comment in the Zoom, in the chat didn't go to everybody, that Just Neighbors and CCAN are two good resources for the funding cuts that directly affect children who now no longer have access to representation. And I think this is an area where particularly communities of faith need to speak up really loud and in an ongoing way, because regardless of how some people may feel about immigration broadly, this is really child abuse, and no way to get around that other than to really insist that something be done, at least for those children. Some of them are really, they're 4 years old. They're not even teenagers. So, and not that that would justify it, but I feel like we really have to speak up on this issue in particular.
Yes. I agree and appreciate that. I mean, there's so much that needs to be done here, and great resources and connections on this call. Please check out the chat if you haven't yet. There's a lot of websites and invitations and calls to action and such. Thank you. Including a rapid response hotline through hosted at Legal Aid Justice Center, but through partnering with a lot of organizations, etc. How to get involved. Lots of ideas have already been shared, and please check out the chat for more, but a few things that are important. One is just a very straightforward: find groups in your area already doing this. No need to reinvent the wheel. If you're close to Legal Aid Justice Center, hop on LAJC Trade. If you are in Nova Friends of Refugees and Congregation Action Network are phenomenal groups. If you're in Roanoke, I did not know the Roanoke Friends of Asylum Seekers, but I'm so pleased y'all exist. I heard a couple of Charlottesville, Waynesboro, Stewart's Draft folks. Sin Barreras is a wonderful organization in that area that I'm associated with. Out in Virginia Beach, there's Bacolao, the Virginia Coalition of Latino Organizations. There are fabulous groups who are already aware of what's happening, who are looking for help, looking for volunteers, and you can plug in and ask what's needed. If you've already got friends in the community, so much the better. If you're worshiping side by side with folks who are immigrants, talk to your church leadership, talk to your congregants, and see, is it delivery from the food pantry because folks aren't willing to come out to the food pantry? Is it accompaniment to court dates or helping drive people's kids to school? Is it an accompaniment has actually come up as a really helpful thing. Is it helping interpret or helping volunteer at a Know Your Rights or Power of Attorney clinic like I was doing yesterday? All of these are great ways to get involved, especially if you're already plugged in. I am not keeping up with the chat, so please let me know if I'm missing important things or important questions, but the bits I'm seeing look great. Another important thing that you can do is for you to be aware of your own rights, the rights of, and the rights of everyone who lives in this country, whether or not they have legal status. So you yourself should be aware of the difference of what to do if you're stopped on the street. And it's helpful to have those little know your rights cards that I saw someone mention in the chat. There's little red cards or little yellow cards that have basic rights. You know, you're not required to answer questions. You're not required to let folks in without a signed warrant, etc. And also a note or a little rapid response hotline that people can call with questions or if a raid is actively happening to get some support. So for you to know your rights, to share that with your friends, with your neighbors, with your congregation. Additionally, helpful for you to know rights as a congregation or in general spaces. So, and this paves the way to a conversation around what does sanctuary mean? The red and yellow cards to print. I'm sorry, I need to stop paying attention to the chat. I will answer that question shortly. The conversation around sanctuary. Now, I mentioned earlier that there was an executive order getting rid of the sensitive locations memo. This means that ICE is no longer directed not to do enforcement activities at medical facilities, churches, and schools, or I mean congregations and schools. However, sanctuary as a concept is much older than that memo, that ICE directing memo. My first introduction to sanctuary as a concept was from the Disney Hunchback of Notre Dame movie, where Esmeralda the Gypsy goes into the cathedral at Notre Dame and is not arrested by the police force because she has claimed sanctuary. And even in the Middle Ages, it was frowned upon to arrest people in a church. That's still the case today. So congregations making a statement of faith are still able to post and claim that this is an exercise of faith. And who was it? Somebody mentioned the Baptist litigation that allows, thank you, Jenny. Yes.
I'll put some links in the chat.
An American Baptist church to have that sanctuary status. And they said, yes, this is a central tenet of our faith. You may not do enforcement within our walls. The other truth of the matter is that in the 80s, when the US sanctuary movement gained ground, there was no such enforcement prohibition. It was just a public acknowledgement of faith trumps law. There is a higher oral code than written law. And so this can lead to civil disobedience. That is an interesting moral question. I am not telling you what to do in that field, but I did want to acknowledge that the idea of sanctuary is not dependent on law, though there was this legal memo for about a decade and a half protecting that right of sanctuary. One way to make sure that sanctuaries and spaces can be more protective for immigrant communities, particularly folks who might be undocumented, is to have clearly marked public and private spaces. Open to the general folks and members only spaces. So, for example, if ICE is allowed, ICE or any law enforcement officer is always allowed in public spaces. If you think, for example, about a restaurant during operating hours, the dining room is a public space that folks can come into, and enforcement action could take place in the dining room of a restaurant. However, law enforcement is not allowed to enter private spaces without a signed warrant. So again, in the restaurant example, that tends to be the kitchen of the restaurant. They can't go back into the kitchen space without some kind of additional permission from the owner or the manager, or a warrant gives them that judicial permission. Within faith communities, you can have, the church I used to work at had a big sanctuary, that might be a public space, but then we had a church hall and a series of classrooms. And you could say, hey, and the sanctuary door, anyone is welcome to come in for worship. We're not going to check your membership card there. But only members are allowed in the church hall, or only members are allowed in the classroom areas. You can also mark those off for particular events. So I have heard about a church doing this actually. Some law enforcement agents came to the congregation during a service. The usher stopped and said, hello, what are you here for? And saw that they, had a warrant, but only for one person. So from the front of the congregation, the pastor said, okay, well, we're now going to adjourn into our private study rooms. And most folks went into the members only space. The usher got with the singular person that they had the warrant to arrest, but they couldn't do a general raid and check everybody's papers. So this is, again, a really niche possibility, but it is a possibility. And there is some information on that has been put together mostly by Congregation Action Network, CAN, and Legal Aid Justice Center, LAJC, which is going to be shared in our toolkit. The last, but certainly not least on my list of ways to get involved are advocacy and demonstrations. So we've mentioned this already: writing, calling, visiting your elected officials at the local, state, and federal level all makes a real difference. If you're going to be writing or calling, writing your own letter as opposed to using a form letter or using a script as a basis, but then adding a sentence or two, especially in email form, is very helpful, because then you don't get flagged as part of being a form email. You'll get read individually. Phone calls make a difference, but and especially at the national level, where they get hundreds of phone calls and emails a day, having that personalization is helpful. But even at the state and the local level, like your county board of supervisors is the one who'll get to determine if your local sheriff can enter into 287G agreement. Your local city council is the one who can make policies that will impact the school district. So the local level matters in a very concrete way in people's lives, as does the state level. The state level is where we determine things like what folks get arrested for, or access to driver privilege cards and driver's licenses. So there's a lot of things that can really make a difference. And that's why it's so important to stay involved and stay informed with elected officials in every level of government. Demonstrations make a difference. They are important. Standing up and being clear about where your values lie on an issue is great. And those personal relationships, those calls, those emails, those visits with your elected officials, I have seen them influence people's mind, and that can really make a difference. So, okay. I'm going to pause here on the involvement side and see if there are any questions on this front.
Sheila, just quickly, I think a lot of folks have been putting questions in the chat, and there's been a lot of interaction, a lot of responses. But I know you're doing the agenda. I think that one thing that stands out is people have been asking, commenting a lot about the warrants, whether it needs to be signed or not. I just want to point out again, Congregations in Action is a great resource. In one of the trainings I went recently, they described the difference. There is a difference of type of warrants that immigration enforcement can bring or present. One of them, the judicial warrant, is the one that is actually signed by a judge and would allow them to enter a house or something and search. But ICE is also using the administrative warrants, which is not signed by a judge, a third-party independent judge or whatever, but it's by ICE agency or judge, and that states that they're looking for a person to arrest. But again, I'm not a lawyer. I don't think there's just a difference. One of them is signed by a judge, gives them permission to enter a home. The other one is just ICE saying that they have the right to arrest a person. And I think those are getting really into the weeds for like people that might be affected to know the difference. But all that to say that there are tactics that are used to get people to open the door. Once the door is open, they can go in. And so I think what Sheila was commenting earlier, a good thing for allies to consider is to be an ally by kind of being present, supporting, especially like in your community congregation, those spaces that are defined private versus public, for example. And if your congregation has a big community that is worshiping, maybe assigning someone that could be a designated warrant reader, so that if there was enforcement presence in your community, that a person that is knowledgeable and understand the difference can go and, at the very minimum, try to de-escalate and protect your community. There's a lot of
Thank you
other
for
questions that I don't know if we're gonna get to, but I think those organizations that we've mentioned are great resources. Thank you.
absolutely. All right. Well, I'm also going to. So I realized I thought I had uploaded this and I hadn't. Um, so I'm currently in the process of uploading, but I told you in the email that I was going to share a congregational resource guide. So the ICPP staff has been putting together this resource guide for congregations. And actually, for the moment, let me just screen share it. It's not as pretty as it's going to be, but it is. It exists. There we go. Perfect. That's not a screen share. Welcome to. Okay. So this is the really quickly, this is the streamlined version of our guidance for welcoming and supporting immigrants for congregation. And again, we start with guidance from scripture because as people of faith, it is a great idea. From all the major religions, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Christianity, Buddhism, I could find stuff for Sikhs, and Quakers are derived from Christians, but I could find something from the Friends and I could find something from the UUs. But for now, this is where we've got, and these are helpful quotes to just remind folks that this is not revolutionary or radical. This is something we've been doing for millennia as people of faith. The ways to get involved are functionally what we've more or less described here: building relationship with friends in the immigrant community, doing advocacy, calls, emails, visits with elected officials at every level, direct support, whether that be to organizations, financial, or volunteering, or to individuals. You know, if your neighbor needs help bringing their kids to school, or if one of your congregation members has to go to an eviction hearing at court and you can offer to accompany them. So all of that is useful. Drafted an interfaith prayer that you are welcome to pull from and or adapt to your own purposes. And then, and the prayer went on to the second page. So let me just adjust that slightly. And here are the resources. So for congregations, this is the rapid response guide that Legal Aid Justice Center put together for sensitive locations, that's schools, congregations, and medical facilities. You can jump straight to that at this link. Recommend looking at your faith traditions, resources, and faith statements. Many times, even if there's additional responses to executive orders or offers of welcome. I pulled, again, just a few examples here. Information on sanctuary, both the history and what it can look like today, and the sample prayer. We are working on a full interfaith prayer service that you can do with other folks in your community. These are some of the Know Your Rights guides that have been mentioned. This is a really comprehensive one from the National Immigration Law Center about everyone's basic rights. There are Know Your Rights flyers around different scenarios. Know your rights in school, know your rights in the car, know your rights at home, etc. These are the yellow Know Your Rights cards. with the Ayuda Uno hotline, the rapid response hotline. These are the red national Know Your Rights cards that you can print off at home in a lot of different languages. The Virginia specific ones are available in both English and Spanish. Every other resources on here is available in even more languages than those. And then the ACLU, in conjunction with a group up in New York City, did Know Your Rights videos in a number of languages that I recommend checking out. Finally, we have some educational resources. So the Presbyterians put together this beautiful documentary film, The Genesis of Exodus, that is about why folks flee, particularly Central America, seeking asylum. And it's a lot about the geopolitical reality and fear and a little bit about faith. So though it was made from a Christian perspective, it's still usable in different faith communities. Just Faith similarly is based originally in a Christian perspective, but is now more accessible widely. And we're working on 2 book studies that you can bring to your small group, your faith community, whatever it may be. So all of this is going to be formatted correctly, and then uploaded on Virginia Interfaith's website this afternoon. It was supposed to happen before this meeting, and it just didn't. But we'll have both a 2-page resource guide that you can print front and back, and then we'll have a more comprehensive booklet that goes into more depth about each of these resources, what they offer, and information you can find there. Okay, I'm going to stop screen sharing unless there's any questions on this handout. Cool. Y'all are amazing. Thank you again. I'm gonna scroll through the chat and answer questions I see. It's again 12:10 right now, so if you need to leave, fully respect that. But if you want to hang out, you are welcome to. If you want to ask your questions out loud, you are welcome to do that as well.
Sheila, this has been really an excellent summarization of everything that it seems to me that has been going on, with a lot of very helpful resources. And it's so inspiring to learn about what so many people around the Commonwealth of Virginia are doing. So if for no other reason than knowing and feeling reassured that there are people in all little corners of Virginia who are really just doing the work, because I'm really convinced that we will prevail. So thank you to everyone who's on here today.
And thank you. And yeah, I loved how geographically diverse this call was. Like, thank you all. And Ken, I saw your hand up. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm going to do a plug, but I put it in the chat, but I just wanted, since a lot of the groups that are involved will be here on March 30th, Nova Friends of Refugees is organizing a immigrant and refugee ally training. It's not for not for clients, but for allies. A lot of the things we're talking about, know your rights, family preparedness plans, but also accompaniment opportunities and who the networks are. The people that will be leading the training will be Legal Aid Justice Center and CASA, Congregation Action Network will have some people there, DMV, whatever their name is now, the network, and several other groups, Catholic Charities, and we're including the Connection for Refugees. But at the same time, this is there'll be a fair where they'll have tables and you can get more information. And we're hoping there'll be volunteer opportunities. And we're working on some advocacy things they could do right there. So it's still in the plannings, and I will get an email. There's a registration link, but we'll wait and see who wants it, see how it goes.
That sounds wonderful.
I don't see it in the chat, Ken, for whatever that's worth.
Oh, I mentioned it. Well, I will. Okay, hang on. Oh, keep going. I'm just looking for the link.
Okay. I'm scrolling through. It looks like things mostly got answered in the chat as well. So any last questions? I'm gonna put
Yeah,
into the chat. Go ahead, Kitty.
I
Yeah.
have a question. I received something in the email, and I'm sorry I cannot bring it to mind right now. But apparently some group organization, I think it's under moveon.org, is coming up with a site that will be, let you know where and what time and where there are ICE picking up people, where there are ICE raids or whatever. I haven't seen more information on it. I just wondered if anybody else had.
So I have not seen that. But one thing that I've heard mentioned in a few trainings is that sometimes folks get warning, sometimes they do not. There are quite a few, particularly local groups who, when they find out about uh, an immigration or ICE presence, they'll put it in a chat or whatever. May have been moved on. The rapid response hotline is working on having that so that they can have, legal observers there to record what's happening, to be present, to stand as citizens. But I have not heard of that happening. And the other truth of the matter is that usually folks do not. I mean, the point of a raid is they don't want people to have advanced notice. So finding out ahead of time is sometimes a challenge. Terry.
Yeah, my understanding is that the Immigration Rapid Response Hotline network in Virginia is not only responding at the time when these things happen, often with last minute notice. They were talking at least a month or more ago about putting together some kind of a database of where these events happen. I don't know, A, if they've done that, and B, how that will be available, and C, who it will be available to. But that was at least talked about at one point. Maybe other folks have more recent information.
What group was that?
Immigration Rapid Response Hotline.
Oh, okay.
And
Thank you.
there's a phone number if you'd like it. It's 855-298-3271.
Yeah, that's on the Congregation Action Network flyer.
Yep.
With also hotlines for Virginia and DC. I do not have it, but you can also reach out to CASA or Congregation Action Network. There's an encrypted network where, folks are actually driving around Northern Virginia trying to be able to rapidly get to spots, but I think you need to be invited to get in there and however that may work. So I don't want to speak for them because that's a whole other operation.
They use the Signal network
Signal, that's the one.
to kind of hide the conversations from folks who don't need to know about it.
Yes, and so I've been kind of watching, but I haven't done that. But giving rides is a big deal, by the way, since it came up.
Really is.
I've given rides to people, to one young man to his asylum hearings, his lawyer, but he didn't have a car. A lot of folks don't have cars. One family is here from Eritrea. I've been taking them to their appointments to get her little boy enrolled in first grade, so in Arlington. So again, that's a little thing, but it's with a lot of people behind it, rides are a big, big deal.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you all one more time for being here. If you'd like, I could definitely use a little bit of centering. So I've copied and pasted the sample immigrant prayer into the chat. You're welcome to pray along with me or have yourself on mute or not, or offer this up in your own tradition, whatever makes sense to you. But I am going to take a moment in silence in thanksgiving for all of you, for all the wonderful people who are doing their best to live safe and welcome. And in solidarity with all of our brothers and sisters who are experiencing fear right now. Let us pray together. Loving Creator, you have formed every human with love and intrinsic dignity. Be with your children who are living in fear, especially those who have come from different countries. Grant our policymakers your compassion to those who come to our country seeking safety and justice. Give us your courage to stand up for those who are forgotten in our society. Lord, who is continually moving, migrating toward justice, help our community to see your face in our immigrant neighbors. Give us the grace to be your presence in this world. Amen, Amin, Ashe. All blessing.
Beautiful, Sheila. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sheila. Appreciate it.
Have a lovely afternoon, everybody. Thank you.